Imagine if I revealed to you that you merely crave what spurns you, not due to a lack within you, but because it unveils a truth that nobody wishes to acknowledge, yet everyone experiences directly, that ignored message, that individual who appears, aloof, distant, unreachable, and yet you yearn for more. You persist, you fixate, as if there were something concealed within them, something that, if conquered, would finally make you whole. But what if the issue was never them? What if the fixation on rejection is actually a reflection of what you suppress within yourself? Carl Jung, the psychiatrist who delved into the human subconscious, believed that we are drawn, almost hypnotically, to what embodies our shadow, the rejected aspects of our own soul. It is not love, it is projection. It is desire disguised as salvation. Until you comprehend this mechanism, you will continue to confuse pain with passion, absence with value, silence with mystery. You will continue to desire not those who complete you, but those who activate your lack. In this video, we will dissect the social facade of rejection. Let's understand why you insist on seeking approval where there is only disdain, and more. Importantly, how to transform this hidden pattern into a tool of emotional strength. We will explore a common illusion that sabotages millions, unearth a dark truth from the subconscious, and ultimately deliver a real method, not of self-help, but of self-mastery. Because true attraction does not come from conquering others. It comes from reconquering yourself. And if you stay until the end, you will understand why rejection has never been your enemy. It has always been your most brutal teacher. From a young age, we are conditioned to avoid rejection as if it were a social disease. School, family, Disney movies, they all program us to believe that if we are good enough, nice enough, and correct in everything, we will be accepted. The hero always wins the love of the girl. The hardworking student wins the recognition of the teacher. The obedient son is the most loved. It seems logical, almost morally correct, but it is an illusion and a cruel one. Not only is it false, but it makes you believe that every rejection you suffer is your fault. If you were not accepted, it is because you were not good enough, and that is where the addiction to validation begins. Without realizing it, you enter a game that never ends, trying to be accepted by those who precisely reject you. But why is this false equation so addictive? Because it activates the most primitive part of you, the fear of exclusion. In caveman times, being rejected by the tribe was a death sentence, and the brain has not evolved much since then. Rejection still activates areas of the brain associated with physical pain. It literally hurts. To avoid feeling that pain, you try to control the narrative. You convince yourself that you can win over anyone as long as you figure out the right way to act, as long as you're more interesting, more beautiful, more available, as long as you don't show neediness but also don't seem cold. You become an emotional contortionist, shaping your identity to what the other person wants. But the more you try to be perfect, the more you disconnect from yourself, and, paradoxically, the more rejection you attract. This is the invisible trap. The idea that rejection is a sign of personal failure feeds the obsession. When someone rejects you, you don't just feel loss. You feel diminished, invalidated. It's as if in that no, there's a silent verdict. You're not worthy. But that's a lie sold on every shelf in society. Pop culture romanticizes the idea that true love requires effort, persistence, sacrifice. How many movies show the protagonist being ignored, mistreated, rejected until finally winning the object of desire? This teaches a perverse logic. The harder it is to get someone, the more valuable that person is, and by extension, the more valuable you will feel when you win them over. But this search is not about the other person. It's about you trying to fill an internal void with external approval. And here comes the brutal twist. You don't desire the person. You desire the feeling of being accepted by the one who rejected you. Rejection becomes a narcissistic challenge, It's no longer about real connection, but about recovering lost self-esteem. And, ironically, the more you pursue someone who rejects you, the more you confirm to yourself that you are not enough. Obsession becomes a cycle of self-flagellation disguised as passion. And, perhaps, the most perverse of all this is the fact that sometimes you feel more desire for the person who ignores you than for the person who accepts you, as if easy affection had no value, as if love were only legitimate when earned through suffering. This logic is not just emotional, it is cultural. We live in an era where the hard to get is fetishized. Instagram profiles become showcases of value based on inaccessibility. The less someone responds to you, the more interesting they seem. The colder they are, the more mysterious, as if coldness were a sign of power and not of emotional dysfunction. This creates a collective psychology where rejection is confused with value, and desire becomes a neurotic hunt for those who despise you. But there is something deeper here. The feeling that if you are accepted by those who reject you, you will have finally conquered yourself. Because deep down, it is not the other person who rejects you. It is you. Carl Jung talked about the shadow as everything that you reject in yourself. Fears, traumas, insecurities, repressed desires. And the problem is that when you do not integrate this shadow, you project it, and you start to search outside yourself for what you lost inside. Desire becomes an unconscious attempt to find yourself again, but a twisted reunion because instead of healing, you reinforce the wound with each rejection. You feel less whole, and the more incomplete you feel, the more desperately you try to be accepted. Love becomes a currency of validation and rejection an emotional debt that you insistently try to pay. But what if all of this is a lie carefully disguised as romance? What if the desire for the person who rejects you is not a sign of true connection, but a red alert from your subconscious? What if rejection is not something to avoid, but something to listen to? Because maybe behind every no you receive, there is a yes that you never gave yourself. Maybe the problem was never the other person. It was you trying to prove your worth in the broken mirror of the other person. And that mirror will always distort the image until you really look inside. The truth is, as long as you keep trying to be accepted, to feel valuable, you will continue to be held hostage by those who deny you. And that is not love, it is submission. But to break this pattern, you first need to see the reality behind it, and it is not pretty. It is brutal, but it is also liberating. You don't desire the other. You desire yourself healed. But since you still don't know where to find this complete version of yourself, you project the promise of redemption onto the other. And the most perverse thing, the more the other rejects you, the more you believe you need them to be whole. That's when Carl Jung comes in with a slap of reality. What attracts you with an almost supernatural force is not what completes you, but what activates your oldest wound. Rejection becomes a mirror, and you a spectator obsessed with the reflection of that which you have not yet integrated. For Jung, the unconscious is not just a repository of forgotten memories, but an active force that shapes our choices, passions, and repulsions. When we ignore our shadow, this set of internal aspects that we deny, repress, or judge unacceptable, it does not disappear. It hides silently, lurking, and projects itself. And the shadow's favorite place to manifest itself is in relationships, especially those marked by imbalance, rejection, and obsession. You think you're loving someone when, in reality, you're trying to recover parts of yourself. You think you're desiring the other person, but you're trying to compensate for your own absence. And here comes the brutal truth. What attracts you most is precisely what reinforces the unconscious narrative that you're not enough. Desire, when fueled by rejection, becomes a closed circuit of pain. The person who rejects you acts like a magnet, not because they have something unique, but because they confirm what you already believe about yourself, that you need to be accepted in order to have value. You become dependent not on the presence of the other person, but on the hope of finally being validated by them. And each "no" you receive deepens the wound instead of healing it. This dynamic is so powerful that it goes beyond the emotional realm and infiltrates biology. Neuroscience studies show that rejection activates the same brain circuits as physical pain. It literally hurts to be ignored, to not be seen. But what few realize is that this pain is more familiar than it seems. It goes back to early experiences, often in childhood, where love was conditional, attention was scarce, and approval was a reward, not a right. As you grow up, this wounded inner child unconsciously seeks to repeat the same pattern because the unconscious doesn't seek happiness. It seeks coherence. And if your emotional history says that you're only loved if you try really hard, you'll fall in love with someone who forces you to prove your worth all the time. But what if this logic is killing you inside? What if what you call love is actually a refined form of self-sabotage? Jung would say that healing doesn't lie in winning over the other person, but in integrating the shadow. This means recognizing that what you so desperately desire is not the other person, but the part of yourself that you haven't yet allowed yourself to love. The other person only activates this absence like an emotional alarm, and the more intense the attraction, the greater the call to look within. You see, you don't want the person who rejects you. You want yourself to be accepted by them. You want someone to tell you that you are enough, that you are worthy, that you have value. But as long as this validation comes from outside, it will be unstable, fragile, dependent. And the truth is that no one will fill this hole because it is not the size of someone else. It is the size of your shadow. But here is the scariest detail. There is a part of you that knows this and yet continues to desire rejection. Why? Because it is easier to project the problem than to admit it. It is easier to say, she doesn't want me than to face it. I don't want myself completely. External rejection is painful, but internal rejection is unbearable, and the unconscious, to protect you, creates a game. You run after those who don't want you because that way you keep alive the hope that one day you will be chosen. And this hope is addictive. It is what prevents you from looking inside and doing the hard work of individuation, the process described by Jung as the path to becoming who you really are. Individuation requires a direct confrontation with the shadow. It requires you to accept your traumas, your shortcomings, your conflicting desires. And, most importantly, it requires you to stop defining yourself by the response of others. Because when you depend on external acceptance to feel valuable, you become emotionally vulnerable to anyone who denies you. And that's why rejection hurts so much. Not because of who said no to you, but because of everything that no represents inside you. Notice how the logic is reversed. What should be just an absence becomes an obsession, and what should be self-knowledge becomes emotional persecution. The unintegrated shadow contaminates desire, and desire corrupted becomes a prison disguised as passion. You think you are fighting for love, but you are fighting against your own story, trying to rewrite it for someone's approval. But this story only changes when you stop wanting to be accepted and start accepting yourself. This is where Jung's philosophy becomes not only profound, but practical. He did not say that we should eliminate the shadow. On the contrary, we should integrate it, know our emptiness, our weaknesses, our most uncomfortable desires, because by bringing light to what is in the darkness, the shadow loses its power to manipulate us, and only then do we stop being puppets of rejection. When this happens, desire changes. It stops being a compulsion and becomes a choice. You no longer desire out of need, but out of affinity. You no longer seek the unattainable, but what resonates with your truth. And ironically, it is in this state of completeness that you become most magnetic, because nothing attracts more than someone who doesn't need anyone to feel whole. What attracts you today may just be a reflection of your lack, but what will attract you tomorrow, when the shadow is integrated, will be what strengthens your presence. This is the turning point, the time to stop desiring the person who rejects you and start listening to what that rejection is trying to show you. Then comes the moment when you stop chasing after them, not out of coldness, but out of awareness. You finally understand that rejection was never about the other person. It was always about how you reacted to it. And now, instead of begging for acceptance, you observe. Instead of fighting for emotional crumbs, you listen to the silence because the silence of those who ignore you says more about you than about those who reject you. It reveals where the need to be chosen still lives. But instead of feeding this hole, you decide to do something radical. Transform it into power. Because rejection, when understood, becomes fuel for individuation. And this is the true method, the one that no one teaches you. The first step is to stop using the other person as a thermometer of your worth. This requires a brutal reprogramming. Every thought like, "What did I do wrong?" must be replaced by, "What did this awaken in me that still needs to be healed?" Because rejection is just the trigger. The explosion is internal, and you only gain emotional power when you stop reacting and start investigating. Why did it hurt so much? What part of you believed that you didn't deserve to be chosen? The method begins with this confrontation. Without filters, without masks, without the need to be right. It's you looking at your own needs without judging, but also without romanticizing. The second step is to integrate the shadow. And this is not a spiritual metaphor, it's a psychological practice. It means getting closer to the parts of yourself that have been discarded, the ones you thought were ugly, weak, inadequate. It means looking at the desperate need for attention and saying, "I see you." It means accepting your anger, your insecurity, your jealousy, not to be a slave to them but to not be dominated by them unconsciously. Because the shadow that you deny controls you, but the shadow that you embrace strengthens you. Jung didn't say this to sound poetic. He said it because he saw in the clinic entire lives being governed by unconscious desires, emotional sabotage, and repetitions of pain. Only those who integrate the shadow achieve true emotional freedom. And the third step, breaking the cycle of validation. This is more than just stopping to care. It's acting like someone who has already understood that the approval of others doesn't change their essence. A practical exercise. Strategic silence when faced with rejection. Instead of chasing after it, you retreat with dignity. You don't respond to provoke, but to preserve, because now you understand your absence has as much power as your presence. And this, when authentic, magnetizes, not because it manipulates, but because it breaks the pattern of dependence. And nothing is more attractive than someone who doesn't need to be loved to feel whole. Another practice. Rewrite your internal language. Every time the thought, "I'm not good enough for this person," arises, you replace it with, "This person doesn't have the emotional capacity to deal with my wholeness." This isn't arrogance, it's clarity, because you're no longer looking for someone who accepts you. You're becoming someone who accepts themselves. And this shift changes everything. Choices change. Targets change. The type of desire you feel changes. You move from obsession to presence, and presence, unlike obsession, does not shout. It attracts in silence. The result of this transformation is not only emotional, it is magnetic. Because while most people still beg for approval, you become rare, not by playing games but by being whole. Emotional self-sufficiency is paradoxically the most attractive state there is, not because it excludes others but because it invites them without begging. You become the kind of person who, even when rejected, remains whole, who, when faced with a no, does not fall apart but redefines themselves. Because now you know each rejection is just a compass, a sign of what still needs to be healed, and also a reminder that the most important approval is already within. This is the final turning point. You no longer live to conquer others. You live to conquer your own internal consistency. And when that happens, the game changes. You no longer need to chase after those who reject you because you no longer reject yourself. And in the end, that is what magnetizes. The peace of someone who does not need to prove anything, the strength of those who know their flaws but carry them with dignity, the power of those who do not need to be accepted because they have already accepted everything they are,